Okay, recording. Okay, I'm here with Eileen Kooreman, and we are Jeremy here. I am representing the center, which is not an official entity yet. That's what we're calling it. The center meaning like youth center, but other people involved in this initiative are Bryant Keel, Kylie Hatfield, and Grant Hoffman, and we've all been a part of this DeVos Urban Leadership Initiative. And Eileen works for the DeVos Urban Leadership Initiative. It's a kind of a training program that invests in urban youth workers around the United States to help equip us with, and you can say it better than I can, but with resources and tools and ways of thinking, and really networks us together with other people in the same kind of purpose within urban environments, to kind of help us to be sustainable when it comes to this youth community ministry. Is that accurate?
Yes. We went back in the day when we began to think about what we wanted to do. We realized it was really important to invest in people who are already committed to working in that space with urban youth, because investing in one organization or one ministry would only take us so far. And by investing in people and hopefully choosing people that would have the capacity to invest in others, we could have a much better return on the impact we were making. So yes, we invest in people like you who feel that this is what God has called them to. And anybody who's raised teenagers knows that it is a calling. It's not just something you do because you're available and you have some time on your hands. It's because you genuinely love kids and want to see their lives transformed. Yeah,
and I mean, if you, I imagine if anybody were to, I'm not assuming people will watch this, but if anyone were to, you're probably interested already in community youth development, whatever language you want to use, right? Youth work, whether you're here in North Philly wanting to connect with youth or reach Youth for Christ, or you're involved in some church organization. And so I recommend definitely checking out, maybe every couple of years, DeVos comes around and picks the same city. So we did it this last year, but maybe a couple of years from now, Philly will come up again. And so if you're still in this youth work, I definitely recommend checking out. But also, some of us through this center, when it ends up getting up and running, we want to be able to connect resources, the kind of resources that we have gleaned from this initiative, and to kind of help equip all of us in this work. And so, I guess sharing about that, kind of exposing that, I thought would be one way to start this conversation. But Eileen, you're a resource. I think I love that you're an advocate that's trying to build into us. And so we can always text you and ask you, hey, what's a book I can read, or who's a person I connect with when I'm trying to learn about how to do things better when it comes to this youth work. And you always have an idea. And so so we're actually in this process to interview sort of youth workers or previous youth workers in North Philly, not exclusively North Philly, but mostly in our community, to just ask them like to glean from them, And even though you're based in Michigan, we thought you've connected to a lot of us in North Philly, especially through DeVos, and you've seen different ways that that's happened. But you also connect with a lot of urban youth workers all over the U.S., and you've seen a lot of different ways and you've seen innovative ways people did things. You've seen patterns. You've seen interesting things. You've seen things that people have tried, experiments. So I thought I would ask you, sort of share a little bit. It's no pressure, right? And I'm sure you'll share resources other times. But even just now, like, what comes to your mind as you think about things that sort of are essential bedrock for community youth development that has remained steady, like in all your years of watching, because things change over time when it comes to community youth development, right? Generation Z is very different, whatever, right? But there's also some similarities. So I was wondering, for my first question, what do you see some things that are always, elements that are always there that we want to build into the DNA of the center?
Well, have you really defined community youth development, Jeremy, and what that means to the center? Because that is a pretty broad term that's actually even used in the secular world around, opportunity youth and a whole bunch of other programming and outreaches for young people. So how are you defining it? And that will help me to know how to.
Are you flipping this on me? No. Well, we're still brainstorming the kinds of programming, I guess, that we want to see potentially happen. And we don't have like a official nonprofit yet. And we can't really do a ton of connecting and getting youth in the space right now that we do have because of the pandemic.
Right.
But I think what we're really imagining is we're using language like incarnational ministry, like having that space to connect with youth that aren't necessarily connected to the church yet or don't necessarily believe in Jesus. So that's in terms of the religious ministry Jesus angle. But I think we're thinking about really this ministry of presence in that space. We're thinking about equipping youth holistically, whether by having different kinds of institutions connecting to it. So, for example, Brian Keel, who's part of our team, is in the finance world. So he really is enthusiastic about things like being able to connect youth to better understanding finances, having a bank account early on, especially if their family's system has not really trusted the banking system, and understanding that and learning to connect to those things. There's traditional programming like arts, but something else that we're thinking about is like a neighborhood-based sort of youth like leadership advisory council that builds into them this leadership. And that we've learned a lot of leadership tools through you guys, through this program. And we thought there's a lot of precious things that we could do to help them see themselves as neighborhood leaders. And so, we think of this space as like a community hub that has potential different kinds of programming into it. But it's mostly, for us, the vision casting is starting with the DNA of how we relate to youth and the community and how Jesus is a part of that. And it's less about, we just do one activity. You start with art.
Right. And I would agree with that. I think that, so you originally had asked me, like, what are some of the things that I've seen hold steady over the years when it comes to community youth development? And some of that is basic principles about how you see kids themselves. We talked a lot about community asset mapping, and that's actually, when we started this training, that the workshop that we do on community youth development was just strictly about, had a different name. It was called Community Capacity Building. And it was really just about the community itself and how you begin to see it not only as a place of huge needs, but as a place that has hidden assets that you can tap into. And as we moved along in helping people to rethink that, we realized that what was missing was the youth themselves. And so that's when we began to shift and say, some things that are really important is that we have a philosophy in all the programs that we create that kids aren't just, our job is not just to keep them safe and provide healthy activities for them to grow in their faith and in their creativity or in their athletic abilities, whatever the programming might be around. But also that if we truly want to disciple them, we have to see them not as potential leaders for the future, but as leaders right now, leaders of their their peers and in their homes and in their schools and in their neighborhoods. So that's like a common theme. Like the programs can change and the activities can change, but the way you see kids is different than the average person serving youth. You actually see almost like, you know, we referred to this in our training materials, youth and adult partnerships are important for shaping and forming and discipling young people. So in that way, kind of seeing young people, and this doesn't mean like if you have a center and you have 200 kids coming, this doesn't mean you're necessarily working with all 200 of them the same way, but that you have ways to scaffold them onto the pathway of leadership and, well, discipleship through leadership.
Right.
So I think that helps build them up and see themselves as having purpose and importance in both the spiritual realm, in the kingdom of God, as well as in their neighborhoods.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm always trying to challenge us with that. Like, where a good gauge is, where are the youth in this conversation that we're having at this moment, you know?
Mm-hmm. So you just mentioned one thing of forming like a youth advisory team. That's a great idea. Yeah. But also I think as you get to build relationships with kids, look for those, you know, however much one individual can manage, mentoring 3 or 4 kids in more than just your programs, but they do life with you. So they see that you're going to be there, you're going to invest in them, and that you see them as a leader among their peers.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's why we've struggled to articulate with some people. I mean, you know how when you use the same word in certain spheres, it means a different thing. So someone says, I'm doing ministry. What they're imagining is like, I meet with these kids that have a Christian family that show up at this church on this Sunday, and we do a Bible study. And that's what they hear and they imagine. And if what we're imagining is, well, there's these 2 kids on this block and this 1 kid on this block, and they're within walking distance of this building, and we connect regularly, and, you know, yes, through this programming, you know, maybe they show up, and then sometimes they just show up, you know, at this building, but they also know where I live, you know, and then they kind of like see me as a mentor, even if we've never really established that officially, you know, and then we bump into each other, and then we have a good relationship that grows into connecting with their parents, and like, and they know that I'm a follower of Jesus, and then like over time they may even come to our church. That kind of like that's the kind of vision of how we talk about and we imagine and there's so many words for that. Some people would use incarnational ministry, some people would use community development, but it's sort of like you get it when you see it kind of thing. If people and like you're saying, it's a lifestyle, it's a way of integrating youth into your mission, and not just you are my mission. So you're part of our neighborhood-wide mission.
Yes.
If that makes sense. Who are some, you're nodding your head, so I'm assuming you're like, yes. And you can respond to this too as part of my next question, but who are some leaders, whether in Philly, I mean, I know the ones that you would say in Philly, but like maybe people outside Philly that some of us Philly folks could really learn from, maybe whether it's like YouTube videos or books or like reaching out to them, that you think are really doing this community youth development, like using those words and what we're describing now pretty well, like youth empowerment, their youth and adult partnership.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly I can just remind you of some of the things that resources that we talk about in the DeVos Urban Leadership Initiative. One is the book Building Cathedrals by Ted Travis, who basically this is what he did in his ministry life, and then he wrote a dissertation on it and decided to turn it into a book to help others to understand not necessarily that you have to do it the model that he did, but that you can build those principles into any program that you're doing as you begin to think about, especially how older kids are looked up to by younger kids, and you can use that those developmental stages as a way to build into your older students and to have them mentoring younger students in their journey. So his book is all about that. And there's another resource that we use that is similar. It used to be only in Spanish, but now for the first time, the book has been translated into English. It's called Generational Leadership by Lucas Lays, and his organization is E625. That stands for Edad, which is ages 6 to 25. So his book, he's both, he has a degree in neurology as well as in theology, and he combines those two things into a unique approach to faith formation, saying that the perfect opportunity is to use each age group of kids to mentor the ones coming up behind them. And the importance of that he especially is talking about churches, the importance of that in the church, because otherwise discipleship all lies in the hands of the pastor or the person that's assigned to youth ministry. Whereas if it becomes more of a philosophical approach at the part of your organization, it will begin to happen naturally. So I would recommend either of those two books.
We'll get a link from you later that I can link to this. But I wonder if, when you're saying philosophical approach, it's almost like the culture or the ethos of the whole group or environment or organization that you're around that has this sense of like, its sensibility is empower the next generation, aggressively empower, aggressively see the youth as included, as they matter. We don't wait until they earn their stripes, or they, we don't have this attitude of just sit there and learn, and by the time you get to my age, then you can lead, right? It's like,
right.
I
was just talking with someone who I haven't spoken with in a while. His name is Gilbert Hernandez, and he is the executive director of Youth for Christ in San Antonio and a DeVos Urban Leadership Initiative alumni. So he was telling me that he had brought a visitor in to, they were doing camp. And the visitor was so amazed because as he was introducing people, he was all of his staff and all the way down to interns are all people who were formerly kids in his program. And that's what you want to aim for, that eventually it's not just you running the programs, it's the kid running the programs, coming up with the ideas and investing in the kids behind them. And that is truly an awesome way to disciple young people.
Yeah, that reminds me of when we went to the conference and you had I don't remember where they were from, but it was the Wyman.
Chicago, yeah, from Lawndale in Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of their staff are former kids from their program.
What would you say? I mean, I'm sure that you have naysayers.
Just think about what that means to the neighborhood too, because it's not just about, and I understand why people do this, but it's not just about getting your education and then moving away. It's about staying and investing in your home community.
What would you say though? I mean, or what would people, I'm sure they've had to defend their model, I guess I'm also trying to think about when it comes to articulating to other leaders that may have difference of opinion. They probably have had to defend their model because I'm imagining that you probably have young people that you're working with, that you're empowering, that are in your sphere, that are co-leading with you, that mess up, or that are sort of, that maybe even the way they articulate, say they don't share about Jesus in the same exact way that you do, or maybe they're you know what I mean? Like maybe some people would be like, well, I don't know if I can trust someone to lead other people until they're up here when it comes to Bible knowledge, or they've gone to seminary, or, you know, whatever criteria. I see this. Maybe it's like they have to come to church every Sunday. Once they're coming to church every Sunday, we can trust them to, or I don't know, different people have different kinds of things, right? Some people would be like, they still smoke, you know what I mean? When it comes to a standard. So
Yeah.
I imagine that you've seen that. I wonder if you could give us advice, or how do you see different people articulate those things? Or
Yeah, well, and actually, Ted Travis talks about that in his book. He realized that he needed a way to figure out who the leaders were he was going to work with each year. And he set up certain criteria and just invited kids to participate in fun activities, and then had specific ways to look for kids who were naturally taking on some responsibilities, for example, or who showed up and followed through when they said they were going to. And those were the kids that he invested more deeply in. And then he pointed to them with the other kids as a standard of, we're investing in so-and-so because he or she did these things, and you can do those too. And if we see that in you, that means something to us. Mm-hmm. So I think failure is absolutely a part of learning and growing, and that's an important thing that we're teaching youth, is how do you see failure as an opportunity? How do you own up when you fail? That's a point of growth in itself. And then in the same way, you're teaching them how to deal with conflict and disappointment, which I don't think our society does in a healthy way today. And as we get more virtual and media driven, I think kids need that more than ever.
Well, if we were good at dealing with conflict, we wouldn't have the state of our political right now where it is. Oh, that's a mess.
Well, what's that thing that they talk? Oscar talks about when we were reading the book, The Anatomy of Peace. When you come up to someone with your fists raised, their natural reaction is to raise their fists back, and that's how we deal with conflict today.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. I mean, I know that when we wade into the weeds, I think there's always going to be slight differences of opinion. When it comes to like, is this kid ready? I think no. Or like, how much effort is it worth the effort to invest in this youth? Or like, are we raising them up too fast? Or are we raising them too slow? And so for me, being able to have those examples, I did read Ted Travis's book. I'll also link to it, and I think I need to read it again because I didn't remember the example you're talking about. Like your brain only processes certain things when you go through something first time.
Well, he just explained how he did that for his program, which was creating a day camp, a summer day camp, where his older kids were leading the camp for the younger kids, and how he identified who the potential leaders were. Another thing he did with that, which was, I thought, really wise, is he knew they were going to mess up. And so each day at the end of camp, they all gathered together to talk about what went well, where things, fell apart, and how they could improve on that. So again, those are the skills that he was teaching them. Like, so sometimes life hands you some disappointments. Some kids misbehave. Some kids aren't interested in something that you put a lot of time into. How do you deal with that?
I'm going to ask you one last question, and you can share whatever you want also besides that, if you think there's something that's helpful. But one last question related to this stuff. I think one challenge that is always going to be there when it comes to anything that has to do with Jesus, we're trying to do ministry in Jesus' name, is there's, and I've experienced this too, as when you already have an established ministry, whether it's a church ministry or whether it's whatever, someone else wants to do something similar, you feel territorial.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that way about someone else coming in wanting to do something. But there's also that kind of feeling potentially when it comes to youth, because everybody wants youth. Say churches, people are aware that without the young generation, it only takes 10 years and then your ministry lacks a certain vitality and it's gotten old, so to speak, right? And so how would you must see in your work the ways different ministries, whether they are church-based, whether they're not based within a church, that word is so loaded, right? But
Well,
how people that are dealing with youth relate to existing, whether it's churches or whether nonprofits, whatever word you want to use, how they handle these kinds of partnerships or conversations. I don't know if you've seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, any advice around that kind of stuff?
yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts. Partnership is always really hard. And because, especially when you're raising money, there's an inevitable sense of competition for who can do the best job. That is obviously not how Jesus tells us to operate. We're supposed to have a kingdom mindset and think about it. In fact, often when we hear about the story, in Galatians, when we hear about the body of Christ and the many parts, we're often only thinking about our organization as being that body. But the body is much broader. But that doesn't make it easier. That actually makes it harder because it takes longer to collaborate, and there's so many more opportunities for miscommunication and mistrust and broken promises. And it's not even always the right thing to do. Sometimes you can accomplish much more just by doing it on your own and not having to get everybody else to get on board with you. Right. But I think there are times when working together, even if it's just sharing information. You mentioned, another youth serving organization opens up right down the street. Instead of coming at them as if they're trying to take away your kids, even just getting to know them and saying, what are ways we could potentially look out for each other? It can be as easy as that, to let the Holy Spirit begin to show you where a partnership makes sense and where it doesn't.
Yeah, there's someone that's trying to do young adult efforts. I've had some young adult efforts in North Philly, and they came and talked to me. I was really encouraged because that means another leader told them to come talk to me. But they're starting efforts, and I cautioned them and I told them, hey, you want to talk to other people and don't just kind of come charging in. But I also was really appreciative that I was thankful because their kind of ministry would be able to do stuff that I can't, because I have a certain DNA. I know my weaknesses, and I just wanted to bless them and help them in whatever ways. But I also wanted to caution them not to come in with this kind of like, mentality.
We're here to save the day.
Yeah, right. And I definitely think that posture when it comes to youth stuff. I mean, you're aware that some of the kind of stuff we want to see, partnerships we want to see in North Philly. I'll just mention that Young Life, I'm on their committee. I know that they're trying to, Ness Espinosa, they're trying to partner with churches. They're really trying to pursue like Sunday morning, that kind of church, and Young Life partnerships to reach schools for youth, and those, or not even just schools, but just if a church has a vision to reach youth and more than only their church youth, but youth outside of the church, I think Young Life is. And so I'm really encouraged by that desire. I don't know that those efforts have really turned into like a transformative thing yet, but I think that's the ambition, and those conversations are happening. So, I mean, as we think about the center, we want to figure out how to do that well. But like you're saying, we don't want to do it in a way that compromises. Like there's a time to do it on your own,
Yeah. But that's, in some ways, that's why it's important to be certain what your mission is, because that helps you to find others who align with it, and those who might be doing a good thing, but they're not, you know, they're not in going the same direction that you're going. So you may find ways to interact throughout the calendar year or the school year or whatever. But yeah, it's very hard to partner with and work with someone who really has a whole different agenda than yours.
And sometimes you think you have similar agenda because you're like, oh, we're youth. But then you realize, like, so let me just say here, if anyone is still watching, I mean, our ambition with the center is, I think it's, the language I would use, it's very evangelistically oriented, in the sense of like, even when we use community youth development, like I think people, or at least I'm thinking about, I think I represent our team well when I say the idea is not just youth that already are in the church, you know, and know Jesus and are committed to Christ and go to church every Sunday. We're thinking about community youth that aren't there yet. And has this sort of that DNA very strongly. So it's not going to necessarily, if we know that mission, if we articulate it well, and if people want to partner for that purpose, great. But if their aim is more like to develop, sort of give leadership opportunities for kids that are already sort of in the church, I guess, maybe we can find ways to incorporate that, but that's not our main mission, you know. And I think that's where we want to be careful about mission drift, is if we feel that it starts to be like, man, how come all of the kids connected to the center are all church kids? And that's where I think we're going to feel a little bit of a sense of like, man, we started this exactly because that's the gap we see. And now we're just an extension of church youth groups. I think that's where we don't want to, don't do that.
Yeah, and maybe part of your job becomes helping kids who come from an unchurched background to see how being part of a church community can be a positive for them, and helping the church community to see how bringing in kids who don't have the language, the clothing, the mannerisms, all of the things that church people come to expect, they are your greatest opportunity. And you need to almost mentor each other or teach each other, learn from each other in order to get there.
Coming to the center. That's a really great way of saying it. I think that's what we mean. I mean, that's kind of how the word center came about. I mean, some people would, depending on people's definition, some people would say we're church planting. But the reason why we want to set where, I mean, it's not an official nonprofit yet, but why the center is kind of where our lingo is right now, because it sort of makes sense of like, exactly that, right? Hey, you don't really jive with that Jesus stuff yet, or church stuff, or maybe you have bad taste in your mouth about church. Well, meet us in the center. Meet us halfway.
Cool. Yeah.
And then, you know, Christian people, can Jesus still be at the center? Especially as you're coming to meet people on the way towards them connecting with Jesus, meet at the center. You know, we like that posture, that attitude of, it doesn't have to be called Holy Spirit, renovation, grace, apostolic, corner.
Better not to call it that.
Probably better not to, in our opinion. Nothing wrong. We're not going to judge people that do.
Yeah.
But for us, that's kind of the DNA that we want to see. So.
And you know what? I think the last 6 months of this pandemic has shaken up everybody, especially the church world. We've all had to learn how to operate differently and think seriously about what's just tradition and what is really central to our faith. And so I think it's perfect timing for you to step in and model that for the partners that you're working with and for the kids that are coming to the center.
Yeah, some of the face-to-face activity we've already been able to do is, and we felt like with masks and whatever, we could still do this, like doing some interaction with neighbors on the block to ask them questions about what would you like to see in a future youth center, point to where the spot is, you know. But I'll say it's been really refreshing as we ask questions, you know, people kind of know, oh, okay, this is good stuff. It's probably attached to religious stuff. Like, I like that, you know, this positivity. We need more of that. They already know that you're religiously motivated, in my mind, right? And but it's refreshing that somehow when you ask questions and give people the space for them to share their opinions, that you're already planting seeds for the work of Jesus in their lives, I think. And so for me, just doing that already is, I feel like we don't have the youth night where people are in there with the video games and fun or whatever yet. But I feel that we're already sort of trying to embody that DNA in the process. So
have you enlisted any youth to be part of that neighborhood door knocking and asking those questions?
That's the next step. I mean, that idea has been brought up. We've gone out twice, but I want you to challenge us on that. I'll say it this way. I tend to be the I know I like to go fast, and some people on our team do a good job of saying, hey, let's also take things deliberately. So, but I think that may be where we're headed.
Yeah, be a great opportunity for an adult and a youth to go together.
Yeah.
And have certain questions that each ask. I think that would be, you would be getting a little bit of a different perspective when you have a young person asking and listening to answers than you telling them what you heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, again, every time we connect with you is really helpful. I know that some of our team is connecting with you in different ways as individuals, whether for individual advice, whether officially to talk about this kind of stuff or for other reasons. But you know, we invite continued encouragement and prayer, not only for the center, really just for youth, community youth development, and here in North Philly. But yeah, thanks for your time. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay.
And yeah,